This case could not have had a more perfect name because it eclipses most of its competitors. Are we waxing too poetic about it, or will our excitement wane when we compare it to its namesake, the venerable Eclipse G500A? This is the Phanteks Eclipse G400A, and we're going to learn all about it right here, right now on Robeytech. This PC case has a high bar to reach, because about 2 years ago, we reviewed the Phanteks Eclipse G500A, and in that video, I said that Phanteks took my favorite case at the time, which I love to recommend to beginner builders, the Eclipse P500A, and they actually made it even better. So when Phanteks offered to send us the Eclipse G400A for review, we were pretty excited about it. I mean, if the G500A was dang near perfect, would the G400A be dang near perfecter? Like any family with a successful sibling, the Eclipse G400A has a lot of expectations to live up to. There are some places it fell short, some places it excelled, and some places where it was just plain okay. But one thing that we will tell you up front is this: when it came to thermal performance, this thing can cook in all the best ways. And trust me, when I say cook this time, I mean it in a positive way, and it's not cooking your CPU. Now, with all that in mind, let's get to know the Phanteks Eclipse G400A a bit better. The new Eclipse G400A is available in either black or white, and both of them have the same $100 price tag. Now, when we start looking at comparable cases, the G400A has a price competition from cases like the Fractal Pop Air XL, the Cooler Master Masterbox 600, and the Corsair Frame 4000D. As far as physical dimensions go, the new G400A has a slightly lower length and width than the G500A, and it's just a hair taller. But for context, these two cases are around 20 inches long, 9 inches wide, and 21 inches tall. So the G400A is also very close in size to the Asus TUF Gaming GT302 and the Antec C7. Now, when it comes to weight, the G400A weighs around 19 pounds or around 9 kilograms, with the white version of the case being slightly heavier. It must be like the powder coating. I'm not saying it eats more or anything like that. Now, this puts it in line with cases like the Antec C5 and the Corsair 4000D. As for the I/O and controls, the G400A has two USB 3 Type A ports, a USB Type-C 3.2 2x2 port, and a combined audio jack, as well as reset and power buttons. Now let's move inside the case, not physically because it's too small, but the G400A, it has a toolless design, so removing the panels is actually super simple. Both the sides have thumb screws that hold the metal and tempered glass panels in place, while the front panel, it has magnets. As for the top mesh panel, it's held in place by a few tabs. Now, the one challenge here is that the glass panel does require a little bit of force to get it in and out of place, and it doesn't really have a good place to hold on to without touching the glass. So go slow, be gentle, and have a microfiber cloth on hand. Now, in case you didn't notice, the G400A has a ton of mesh surfaces for airflow. The front, top, and side of the PSU shroud are all mesh. Now, as for motherboard support, the G400A has support in micro ATX, ITX, ATX, and eATX motherboards with a width under 280 millimeters. Now, not only that, the G400A eclipses its predecessor by adding support for BTF and Project Zero Backconnect motherboards. Hold your excitement over Backconnect support, though, for just a second. It's not as exciting as it sounds. Now, moving on to GPU support, the G400A supports GPUs with a length of up to 415 millimeters. With the current size of GPUs, this case has more than enough room for your RTX 40 series, your RX 7000 series, and let's not forget, Damien, your Intel Arc GPUs. Yes, use 7 of them. Now, as for fan support, the G400A can fit 340mm fans at the case front, 3 120 or 2 140s at the case top, 3 120s at the case bottom, or what Phanteks calls the mid plate, and either 120 or 140 at the case rear. Now, if you're concerned about only having the option of 140mm fans in the case front, Phanteks actually has you covered there. Now, the G400A comes with 4 of their M25 Gen 2 DRGB fans, and these things have a max airflow rating of just under 105 CFM and a max static pressure rating of around 2.8 mm H2O. In other words, they're going to get you a lot of air inside your case very quickly. Not only that, the M25 140s daisy chain for easier cable management, and they are digital or DRGB equipped to match the DRGB lighting strip inside of the G400A. Now, one observation with the fans before we move on. We notice that the bottom front intake fan sits pretty low. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it's going to help feed any bottom or mid-plate fans. Just be aware that this is going to be living in your basement of your case, so don't go like tucking cables up into it and just hearing that. It's like a jackhammer in your ear. With that in mind, radiator support is a bit limited. Phanteks only lists support for up to 360mm radiators at the case top, which we're gonna talk about the mounting here a little bit, or 120mm radiator at the case rear. However, there are a few caveats here. You can technically, and I say technically, but you could use a 280mm radiator at the top and the front. But both of these have their own set of challenges. Up top, you're limited to pretty much one position because there are no rails for 140mm fans, just a couple screw holes. Now, as for the front position, you'd have to use the topmost position, but you'd have to sacrifice a top fan, which would look really goofy. As for a 360mm radiator at the case top, there are some considerations here too. Depending on the length and depth of your radiator that you would like to use, you may need to remove the rear fan, replace it with a 120mm fan, or run your hoses to the back of the case and hope there's enough clearance for them to fit in between the end of the radiator and the fan itself. This is one of those places where it's worth being conservative on your part sizes. Don't go for one of those dummy thick AIOs and you should be fine. So one other thing worth mentioning about 360mm AIOs, sometimes, and in the case of this build, you actually aren't able to get screws in every single one of the screw holes because the rails don't go all the way to the front. It's gonna be fine. I mean, unless you're like moving it on like a Humvee or something like that, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so if you want to use a CPU air cooler instead of an AIO though, the G400 has up to 184mm worth of clearance for this one. So chunky air coolers like the Cooler Master MA824 Stealth or the Noctua NHD15 G2 will fit. And with those 140mm M25 fans up front, this case sets an air cooler up for mad success. Now moving on to storage space, the G400A has support for either two 2.5-inch or two 3.5-inch drives, but if you're looking to install two 2.5 inches, then you're only going to be limited to adding one additional 3.5-inch drive. PSU support, the G400A can support PSUs for up to 270mm in length, so there is a healthy amount of space down in the bottom, but much like we saw with NZXT's redesigned H5 Flow, this thing has a huge mesh portion to it, and it is very easy to see through. This means you're either gonna have to manage your cables well, or live with shamelessly messy cables. And since we're talking about cable management, the G400A does provide a cable channel with branded Velcro tie-down straps, but with how thin the case is, you're gonna want to be very careful how much you bunch together as space can fill up quickly. In fact, got a little bit of a bulge back here. Moving on to our last part of the tour inside of the G400A, the front panel control cables have a unified front panel connector. Yes, which is always amazing to see. Now as for the USB 3, USB-C, and HD audio cable, they all match the color of the case we're reviewing, with the exception of the HD audio mini cable. Okay, we've talked about the ins and outs of the Phanteks Eclipse G400A. Let's take a look at thermal performance. As a reminder, the specs for our test bench are on the screen here. They're the same parts we use in all of our PC case tests every time. We're also testing in the same environment with the same tests. Also, these tests are run at Intel stock CPU power settings. Now, since this is also an airflow case, we'll be testing thermal performance with both an AIO and a CPU air cooler. And with that, here is the data. During our AIO test, the G400A held an average of 23 degrees Celsius while idle. This average puts it in line with cases like the newly redesigned NZXT H5 Flow. For perspective, this was only 1 degree warmer than our coolest case, the Asus TUF Gaming GT302. Under full CPU load, the G400A averaged 71 degrees Celsius. These temps put it in line with cases like the NZXT H7 Flow, the Fractal North XL Glass, and the APNX V1. These are some incredible cases for the G400A to be competing with. As far as gaming goes, we have a similar story. The G400A averaged 41 degrees Celsius, landing it in between the APNX V1 and the newly redesigned NZXT H7 Flow. Now moving on to air cooling, the G400A eclipsed a number of its competitors yet again. At idle, the G400A CPU averaged 25 degrees Celsius, matching cases like the two Fractal North XLs, as well as the TUF Gaming GT302. Under CPU load, the G400A pushed itself in between the Geometric Future Model 5 and the Lianli Landcool 207 with an average of 76 degrees. And finally, in gaming, the G400A gave no quarter as it pushed its way into third place with temperature averages at the low end of 46 degrees Celsius. This put the G400A squarely in between the H5 and the H7 Flow. As for GPU temperatures, the G400A was a bit more mediocre than monstrous in its cooling. In our AIO test at idle, it held our test GPU at thermal average of 30 degrees Celsius. This put it in line with the NZXT H9 Flow and the APNX V1. Under GPU load in our gaming benchmarks, the G400A held averages of 64 degrees. This positioned it next to cases like the Montech GearSeeker's King 95 Ultra. Our air cooler test showed the same story with the G400A test GPU hanging in at an average of 30 degrees at idle and 64 degrees while gaming. Overall, not terrible, just not wholly remarkable. So with the thermal test and a build or two completed, would we recommend the Phanteks Eclipse G400A as the next case, and did it live up to the legacy of the G500A? When we looked at the whole picture, the G400A is great with thermal performance, versatile with its motherboard support, and it has some nice additional features like the M25-140 fans and the DRGB color strip. But as much as the G400A makes some improvements over the G500A, it has some quirks of its own. We mentioned some of these quirks while we were talking through the design, but they're worth talking about in more detail, starting with the access to the top of the case. Only a portion of the top panel is removable to give users access to the top railing. And the fact that the railing doesn't actually extend the entire length of the case is also strange. But the actual mounting points below can be a bit more limited as well. While you can mount two 140mm fans or a 280mm radiator up at the top, you are locked into one position and the position is pulled all the way at the back of the case, which could cause problems with the rear fan. But let's be honest, 360mm radiator can cause problems with the rear. It's like they don't like rear fans. But even with the railing, a 360mm radiator will fit-ish, but they don't have a whole lot of wiggle room themselves, especially if you choose to keep the stock 140mm fan in the case rear, which, like we did, but then you can't mount all the screws. So because of how tight this section of the case is, with both front intake and rear exhaust fans living inside of the main chamber, it forces builders to be more aware of the size of the radiators. And if you're planning on keeping that rear fan installed, we'll have to sit at the lowest possible position, and you'll need to run your AIO hoses to the back of the case. This is also where you need to be careful with AIOs that have slightly longer radiators or more pronounced hose bump out. Now, since we're talking about fans, bottom fans are great at hiding those unsightly HD audio cables. They also hide the cable channels at the bottom too, which is a nice touch. So just be aware, if you're one of those people who likes hiding your case and fan cables behind your motherboard, the space can get a bit tight, especially if you're using an ATX or EATX sized motherboard. The solution here would be to run any case or fan cables where you want them, or you want them to live, before you actually install your motherboard. It just gets too cramped beforehand, and to be honest, it's a little bit questionable because it can put some pressure on some of those thicker cables. Now you might be thinking, Robey, you're missing the obvious. These issues would totally be solved by using a Backconnect motherboard. And if that's you, you're not wrong. But unfortunately, that presents a whole new challenge. The G400A, it's a lot like the Asus TUF Gaming GT302. It's performant for both AIOs and air coolers, but it struggles massively when it comes to space for cable management. And those issues are even more pronounced when you're using a Backconnect system. The space between the motherboard tray and the side panel is so incredibly limited that you need to pay close attention to the clearance and just how aggressively your cables would have to bend to make it work. Honestly, you're gonna have to use PSUs like the TUF Gaming PSUs that have those soft, malleable cables, or pretty much like anything like that. I think Seasonic makes them as well. We're not saying the case can't support Backconnect, but it's just not beginner friendly in the G400A. We just wish this case were just a bit wider to accommodate the cables in the back a little bit better. That being said, for more standard builds, Phanteks used cableways from the G500A's design to use rubber grommets instead of actually those old shifting panels. Now, they are spaced for EATX boards, so they may or may not be useful to you. So with all of that considered, our recommendation is this. The Phanteks G400A is still a decent case for beginner DIYers, but it does have some elements that require a little bit of extra thought and planning. But nothing so big we discourage anyone from considering this case. If you like the design and the performance and you can commit to finding the right places to make this case the best version of itself that it can be, you know what, you should absolutely have at it. Now, we've also shared a few tips and tricks along the way to help you avoid any possible frustrations, and if you stick around at Robeytech Live, you'll probably see us build it right here on that very, very soon. Now, while it may not be the darn near perfect sequel we were hoping for, I would say it's actually moved further away from perfect. It's still a good case that has amazing airflow and has some great aesthetics out of the box. And those were our thoughts on the Phanteks Eclipse G400A. But you know what? We actually want to know what you think. Would you rather have slimmer cases with no Backconnect options, Or do you like cases that can do it all, but with some extra challenges? I'd love to know that in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so that you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this right here at Robeytech. Also, if you have questions about this case, or if you're trying to decide about what kind of parts or whatever to put inside of it, head over to our Discord server, discord.gg/Robeytech. You can meet other tech and PC enthusiasts who love to talk about these very same things. And you know what? You might just make a friend. Anyway, guys, that's it for us. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.